As you know, one of the legends of engineering and the scientific community, Lotfi Zadeh, passed away about 6-7 months ago at the age of 96. In this memorial session, we are trying to gather some of the closest friends he had, and we are taping the session for distribution worldwide. And among our panel, we have our distinguished colleague, and probably the one who knew Lotfi the longest of all of us, Professor Thomas Kailath. And then we also have Professor Madan Gupta, who should be here somewhere, all right, and who was also known Lotfi for a long, long time. In fact, Madan was the last colleague who saw Lotfi before he passed away. Unfortunately, at the time he visited his house, he was not in a state that he could even talk to him or open his eyes. And then we will have Professor Tien, my dear friend from University of Miami, as well as my dear friend from the other side of the Southeast Asia, Takeshi Yamakawa, who is also known Lotfi for many, many, many years. In this presentation, which perhaps Professor Islami has seen it before in Tehran, but it is much more revised than what you saw. I'm going to go over basically his life and his contribution basically from Baku to Berkeley. Lotfi Zadeh was born on February 4, 1921 in Baku, Azerbaijan. At the time, Azerbaijan was part of Soviet Union, USSR, and about 60 years prior to that date, Azerbaijan was part of Iran. His father was Rahim Asgarzadeh, and he was a merchant, and he was a journalist from, he was born and raised in Ardabil, which is part of today's Azerbaijan in northwest Iran. The picture you see here is what Baku looked like at the time of his birth. This is Lotfi's picture, the earliest pictures that we have. Most of these pictures are taken from the book that my wife Jira and I produced and published for Faiz Zadeh back in 1998. And he finished 3 years of elementary school, and due to the stress of the communist environment, they decided to go to original country of his father, Rahim, to Tehran. And this is what Tehran looks like in 1931. And in Tehran, he enrolled at the American college, which was a missionary school. And by mistake, they put him in the 8th grade, even though he should have gone to 4th grade. So he had a big jump of 4 grades. Later on, they found out the mistake, and they put him in the 6th grade. There's a mistake of 2 years, okay? But from 8, and after 2 years, he went on to 9th grade. Basically, he skipped about 3 years of high school. And he entered University of Tehran, School of Engineering, and then he was able to.
And more, this was also the toughest high school, as you remember.
I know, this is the toughest high school, and he wants me to know that even to the same high school. After the missionary school was changed to a national high school in Tehran. And these are the only pictures you see from Lotfi with hair, never mind black or white. Okay, and he was again second rank at the entrance school of the School of Engineering in Tehran. And to quote him, in Iran, knowledge and culture has always been on a pedestal. My years in the University of Tehran were happy years of my life. Back in 1990, we were at UCLA campus, and some of you were there. We were honoring Professor Reza, and Lotfi flew from Berkeley to Los Angeles, and he went through his own life, his own educational life. He was telling me that University of Tehran School of Engineering was much, much tougher than MIT for him. This actually is today's entrance of University of Tehran. And then you see here a famous picture in his room, private room in his house in Tehran, which says Odin in Russian means leave me alone, basically. And he was always thinking, and this, after graduation, he worked for 2 years for US Army in Tehran when the Allied forces had occupied Iran during World War II. Not 3, sorry about that. He received a green card and planned his journey to the United States. On his way, which took about 3 months to get to US by boat. This is a scene from his stop in Cairo, and you can see basically in front of the pyramids. And these are some of the modes of transportation at that time. Of course, they also had luxury new items for car. And in Tehran, prior to the Zadeh family moving to Tehran, another family also moved from Latvia to Tehran, and that was the family of Zadeh, who were both ethnically Jewish, and they were trying to get away from Europe and the onslaught of Nazis, and they settled in Tehran because they were closer to them and always been very friendly with our own Jewish Iranian communities. Of course, his wife, his brother Lotfi's mother was a pediatrician, and what happened is that the younger sister of Faye got sick and in Tehran, and they said, oh, there is a Russian-speaking pediatrician in town, let's take her to that doctor. And that's how the two families got to know each other. Of course, they were all speaking Russian, so they were very much at home together. So on his way to United States, it took about 3 months and on a ship and many seas and 2 oceans, and then you see the rest. Now they're arriving in New York, and of course he arrived by himself. His parents were still behind in Tehran. He entered MIT for his master's degree, and as I said before, he always said that MIT was much simpler for him than Fanni, meaning engineering, the school over that time. And then later on in 1945, his parents followed him. He had no reason to live, to be in Tehran anymore because their only child was gone. And no other members of the family are surrounding them. So when they arrived in New York, Lotfi was in Boston and in Cambridge, and he said to himself, how can I possibly support my family? I need some kind of income to be able to support them because they're coming here without any resources. So he moved to Columbia and received a lectureship. At the same time, he was a PhD candidate. And this picture actually showed how Columbia looks like, and New York City at the time. This is one of the buildings of the then Columbia University. This is actually his father Rahim, and Faye, his wife, and this is his son Norman, and I think, I don't know where Estella, their daughter, was at the time. So when Lotfi heard that Faye is also in New York with her family, Lotfi went to see Faye for the first time after quite some time, because they separated. Faye was telling me one time that I never knew that he was interested in me. I thought he's all interested in my younger sister. But anyhow, he opened the door and said, "Oh my God, what happened to all the hair, Lotfi?" And she was really shocked. They got married a year later, March 21st, 1946, Nowruz Day, the Persian New Year, which I show you a sign of it. And you can see here scenes from New York City at the time, and also a picture with the young new Shah of Iran, and perhaps with some visitor. Lotfi was a very avid photography. He was taking a lot of pictures of famous people and so forth. Then he was promotion at Columbia University and moving to UC Berkeley. In 1957, he was promoted as full professor at Columbia, and then opportunity arrived to go to Berkeley, and then he moved there in 1959. And at Berkeley, he felt that he needed to work much harder and was ready for the challenge. Again, this is scenes from UC Berkeley at the time in 1959, and this is Lotfi's big office about maybe 25, 30 years ago, or even longer. Some of you may know that his office was a maze full of shelves of books, and you have to find a map to get to his desk. And then once you get to his desk, there is no room for books are all over except a small part that you can write things. Okay. Some of the things that he initiated really, and I may or may not be completely correct, and you may not agree with me, especially Tom, that he is credited that connecting computer science and computer engineering with electrical. And this is a model that many people all over the world, electrical engineering departments have chosen to connect computer with electrical. And one time I asked him, Lotfi, why did you do that? He said, computer technology is moving very fast, it drags electrical with it, and it puts it together. In 1968 was the time that I was a PhD candidate at Illinois, and I saw him at Berkeley, and he is quoted, at the time he was the chair of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at Berkeley. That is the only administrative job he ever had, except for the BISC group, which was really not an official administrative job. He is quoted as saying that to survive in this job, meaning department chair, everybody has a bed, all in their own ivory tower in the department. To survive in this job, you have to kill yourself. Now, he published fuzzy set paper in an obscure journal, which I may or may not agree to that because I have a paper in that same journal myself. He was information and control. And he was on the advisory board of this journal, and he said, out of respect, they accepted my paper because IEEE rejected it. Now look at it. It's got actually even more than that. I revised these numbers last night, but I forgot to revise this one. I just checked on my phone. The fuzzy set paper has 102,700 some odd citations. as of last night. Of course, these numbers are really out of norm, completely out of norm. 197 total, almost 198,000 citation, and basically every 4 days, his citation is equivalent to a normal scientist for 4 months. That's what it is. And back in 1992, I had prior conference called International Symposium on Robotics and Manufacturing in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I remember Tom was there. Tom came all the way from Stanford to honor Lotfi. And he and I were both somewhat younger. And I coined the idea of father of fuzzy logic. And later on, I asked him, should I call so-and-so father of this? He said, no, one father is enough. But I went to JPL to give a lecture, and Farad Hadi may remember that, and there were emails running around JPL, if Lotfi Zadeh is father of fuzzy logic, Jamshidi is the son of the same. You remember that, Farad? So, this is the man and the citation that he has is amazing. It's a record for one single paper right here, all-time record. Now, somebody asked him, I asked him one time, many others may have asked him saying, how the heck did you come up with the idea of fuzzy set? He said that he had gone to attend a conference in New York City. His parents were still in New York City while he was at Berkeley, and he had an appointment to meet somebody and was waiting and waiting for that individual to show up to go to perhaps some discussion and something like that. And he said, it dawned on me that people are saying something, but in reality, it's not going to happen. It's uncertain. And the idea of fuzzy set came to his mind about that time. Of course, no one except perhaps more than Japanese have put Lotfi Zadeh on the global stage. In 1989, 4 Japanese, 2 of them Japanese Americans, came up with 4 fuzzy chips. 3 of them were digital, 1 was analog, and the inventor of that is my friend Takeshi Yamakawa, who's sitting here in the second row. And I've been to his lab in Izuka. As fast as a scientist writes a conference paper in 1 week, he does that new chip design, or he used to. So as you can see, we have several different applications came about, consumer products, house appliances, automobiles, elevators, etc. Back in 2012, I was giving a lecture at US Patent Office on system engineering idea, and we have been tracing the number of fuzzy logic patents in the US. This number is about 3 weeks old, which I got from my friends at the patent office, about 24,000 plus US patents alone on fuzzy logic. Okay. In 1973, he published a paper on fuzzy inference for decision making. In 74, late Professor Mamdani published what turned out to be the first work on fuzzy control of a synchronous motor. Later in 1990, Sugino came up with a fuzzy inference such that rules, consequences were crisp and certain. This is called Takagi-Sugino fuzzy rules. Jerry Mendel came up with a so-called type 2 fuzzy system at the University of Southern California. And many people have done so many works. Some of them are in the audience. This is just a sample of the work. Rafik Aliyov, Janusz Kapczyk, and Witold Petrix, and Burhan Durkson, some of the friends of Lotfi and friends of me who have published a lot to it. And of course, Madan Gupta has done great deal of that. Now, Lotfi, in all truthness, didn't like Sugina model very much, simply because it didn't have a fuzzy output. It has an analytical output, it's a crisp output. But he was so polite that he would never say it in a public situation. He traveled a lot. One year, he said, Mo, I've traveled 66 times this year. I said, that means you have traveled twice in 1 week, in several of those. There's only 52 weeks to a year. And in 2019, he had his first heart attack, and all of his friends, including Rudy Kalman, were concerned. Friends from MIT and others were contacting me. And I was basically an interface between Fuzzy family and especially Faye Zadeh and those friends. And I know Rudy called Faye all the way from Zurich and talked about his case, his situation. Although he didn't agree with Fuzzy's self, but he was gentleman enough and cared enough to do that and worry about Lotfi's situation. Lotfi, as you know, loved garage sales. He used to go before the laser pointer, he used to go and buy antennas from the cars. And I was in one of these lectures, he would open it and go like that, the big long stick, the antenna. Sometimes he would hit somebody by mistake, okay, or almost did that. And Professor Eli Jury is another mentor of mine who was a colleague of him at Berkeley. He told me one time that we were in a seminar at Berkeley and Lotfi was dozing and was semi-sleep, and actually he was actually asleep. Then he woke up and started clapping. Didn't know the lecture hadn't finished yet. In any case, he was telling also, and that I'm quoting, if there is a good garage sale nearby and he's on his deathbed, he would try to get up and go. Of course, those of you who've been to his house, you know the state of the affair. This is the whole family. Daughter Stella, which is coming from the Persian word setare, meaning, star, thank you. The son Norman came from the word Nariman, is an ancient Persian male name. Wife Faye, father Rahim, and mother Anya Kurima. Now, I became more active in fuzzy logic after 1980, when I came back after the Iranian Revolution. And among my 10 or more of the technical books, fuzzy logic has been used quite a bit. And in 1993, I published a fuzzy logic book with my students that Motorola chose it to go with their chip, chose the among 15 other books. He used to tell me, don't get into fuzzy logic because I don't want you to have enemies and people who would be downgrading your work. But after the fuzzy chips came out and the global reputation of fuzzy came up, and was a different situation. We worked for 6 months on Lotfi to try to take 3 days off. Our joint friend, the Etemad in Bay Area, the 3 couples, Gila and I flew from Albuquerque to Reno, Nevada, and met by a friend. It took us to Etemad's lakefront property for that long weekend. And Lotfi and Faye and Jaleh and Galen Etemad drove from Berkeley. And we were spending 3 nights and 3 days together, the 6 of us. And that was the time that we decided to publish a book by Faye to actually tell the whole story, because she was somewhat unhappy that people don't know what she's gone through. This book, by the way, is electronically available. It is, I can give you the website. It's basically wacong.org/free books by Jamshidi. And there are about 12, 11 of my textbooks plus this particular book. And this is the only book that Lotfi and I edited together on machine intelligent quotient. And this book was translated into Russian and Azeri primarily by effort of Professor Aliyov in Baku. Unfortunately, never made it into Farsi language. But those of you who have read it, and I understand Mrs. Kailath is probably already read it, and chapter 3 is the most sensitive of all the chapters because it shows all the private things going on in the family before Stella or Norman was born and issues there. And Lotfi never ever opened that book to read it. He knew it's not too complimentary and he didn't want to have any hard feeling with Faye because he loved Faye dearly, but unfortunately his scientific work overshadowed many things. This is a picture of my younger brother between Faye and Lotfi in the conference in Santa Fe. Now, several years ago, I was invited along with Lotfi to go to Houston, Texas. It was a large Persian community who was honoring Lotfi, and they said, no one is more qualified to introduce him than you. So we both went there, and we arrived in Houston airport together, and then we went to this event. And what I did, in those days, there was no internet. In that period, I had to go to the library of my university in Albuquerque and look at all those big citation books. And I was trying to figure out what kind of citation did he have before 1965. Okay, the lion's share of what you see here, I saw in the citation, is because of fuzzy logic. But he made great contribution before fuzzy logic, and I'm sure Tom Kailath will tell you that. In network theory, in system theory, the book that he published with late Professor Charles Desol was a classic book. We used to call it Bible in Iran. And then one thing which is a little bit controversial is the concept of Z-transform. Z-transform, actually, I worked with my late friend Peter Dorato. We actually worked together and we saw work by W. Horowitz, which during World War II actually came up with that transformation between S-plane and Z-plane, which later on called Z-plane. So it's not quite fair to basically allocate Z-transform is really belongs to Zadeh and Ragazini alone. It belongs to others, Horowitz, and to some extent to Eli Jury, who was a graduate student who was not even co-authored in that paper. Okay, I've been a student myself. I know sometimes that issues happen between professors and ignoring the students' rights. But nevertheless, Eli took it from that point on and created modified Z-transform. And in mathematics, Z-transform is equivalent to Lorentz series. And it can be traced all the way back to 1730. Okay. And in 1953, he developed theory of nonlinear filters. And as I said, he had contributed in two categories: 56, formulated system identification problem; 63, the book with late Professor Desor; 65, of course, fuzzy set. The only people that he ever co-authored in non-book publications are probably Richard Bellman. I don't know if anybody else, maybe Tom will know. Richard Bellman. In 19 73, he introduced fuzzy if-then rule and linguistic variable, led the first paper on fuzzy control by Mamdani. And in 79, developed theory of approximate reasoning, 85, usuality and common sense reasoning, 86, test score semantics, and so forth and so on. This will be there already. In 2011, he created the concept of Z numbers, which is basically similar to a complex number where you have two components attached to the same number. One is the value and one is probability of this number being true. And that created a journal paper for him at the age of 92. And at the age of 92, with the help of colleagues from patent office and friends in Washington, D.C., he created a patent for him, and a company called Z Advanced Computing was created. Both Lotfi and I, he was and I'm still on the advisory committee of that company. And last thing I know from them, they're working about $30 million investment in the company. He was quick to, in terms of nationality, that's another controversial issue. You know, he was smart enough and diplomatic enough to not to attach himself to any of those countries his life took him through. From Baku, being Azari, moving to Iran, being Iranian, having a Russian mother, being Russian, becoming US citizen, and so forth. And I used to joke that since the advent of fuzzy chip, every 2 months, every 2-3 weeks, he's in Japan. Maybe Japanese are claiming him as a Japanese. So the conclusion is that his nationality was intentionally fuzzy. Okay. And this is, he had about maybe 32 honorary doctorate degrees, member of National Academy of Engineering, and many awards, including the Medal of Honor, the highest honor that IEEE can do. In 2013, was the last time I organized a conference for Lotfi, and I added Faye in the whole mix. It was a joint dedication to both of them. And unfortunately, Faye hated checking the airports. You know, they check you and they pat you and they run you through the X-ray and so forth. She didn't come. But the book and the proceeding is to her name as well. And this is a group picture that we took. Here's Takeshi that you see, Madan Gupta, Ron Yeager, Lotfi, myself, Rafiq Aliyov, and so forth. And this is the last picture I took while he was still very communicating over there. And this is the conclusion. It's not often easy to talk about the visionary and the scientist, which like Lotfi can come along. He was a very wise, ethical, visionary, and deep-thinking man. The world is a better place, and people around the world are having a more comfortable lives because of contribution to this man. We can just ask the Japanese friends. The elevators are smooth, air conditioning are doing very well, and so forth and so on. May God bless his soul and that of his faithful wife, Faye. This is the end of my part, and let me now introduce my dear friend, Thomas Kailath, which if I want to do justice to him, I need to shut down the conference for a day and a half, because that's how much I can talk about Tom. It's suffice to say that he received the highest honor of science medal from President Obama in the White House. Like Lotfi, he also was a Medal of Honor honoree of IEEE, member of National Academy of Sciences, member of National Academy of Engineering, and he's also entrepreneurial. He helped develop companies in the Silicon Valley. I can go on and on and on. Tom, let me please.
I could speak for a long time on Lotfi, but I won't. He gave me 10 minutes, and that reminded me of a story. I may not have all the numbers right. Okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Lately someone asked Winston Churchill to give a talk. And he said, well, I'm interested, but how long should it be? He said, if it's an hour, I need, just making up numbers, 6 months. Sorry, I don't need it. I had various photos and so on, but I didn't bring them. If it is, what did I say, 6 months, 3 months? Senior moments here. But if it's 10 minutes, then I need 9 months. If there's no time limit, I can start immediately. What do you want?
You take it.
Anyway, you know, I'll try to keep to within 10 minutes or so. But okay. So, you know, first of all, thank you, Mo, for making great efforts to have me here. You persisted till the last minute, and thank you for all the arrangements for Anu and me, and Jila also. So, I have many blessings in my life, but one of them, and one of the, even after my parents say, was getting the attention of Lotfi Zadeh in 1959. When I was finishing my master's thesis at MIT. Now, it was America, first of all, at that time was a very different country, and the scientific community was much smaller, and everybody managed to know everybody else. Most of the action was on the East Coast. There was hardly anything on the West Coast. So, when I went to MIT, communications through random channels, troposphere and so on, was the news, and there was a famous system that was invented at Lincoln Lab but not published till '58, called RAKE. It's an anti-multipath communication system, and later also anti-jamming. And Wozencraft, my advisor, said to me, you know, there are many things about RAKE that are imperfectly understood. So why don't you make a study of time-varying channels, linear time-varying channels? I said, Professor Zadeh has already done his PhD thesis on this. What more is there to learn? He said, well, those were general time-varying systems. Communication channels have constraints which are different. In particular, the bandwidth is finite. And also the memory there, the duration of the impulse response is finite. So those are two constraints you have, because the duration of the impulse response says if you try to send signals too fast, there'll be intersymbol interference and so on. So why don't you analyze, make a study of those channels? So I did, and I made tap delay line models, which had some interest. And then came the question of how do you identify such channels from putting in a probing signal and measuring the output? How do you determine what your model parameters are? Islami yesterday was talking about parameters. So it was easy to find a sufficient condition under which the channel could be identified. And it is actually that the product of the bandwidth, namely a time-varying channel, if you put a sine wave in, Doppler and so on, it gets expanded to a certain bandwidth. And you put an impulse in, it gets spread out. The product of those two should be less than unity in the right units. That's a sufficient condition. Is it necessary? So I spent several weeks working on it, a couple of months, and then one day my advisor, usually you work by yourself, you met your advisor occasionally, in the hall, that's all. So he said, how's it going? He said, you'll have to give me another problem because I can't do it. I said, okay, that happens. Why don't you write up what you're doing? And that will be useful also, so nobody else will repeat your efforts. In the process of doing that, as often happens, I figured out a way of finding necessity. It was a somewhat heuristic argument, but using arguments at the time that were common. If you have a signal of long duration T and big bandwidth W, essentially two TW numbers characterize it. That's not mathematically correct because a finite duration signal must have infinite bandwidth. Nevertheless, I said it's heuristic. I used degrees of freedom argument and got this. It's a very simple argument and so on. In particular, violation of this condition explained when the rake system failed to function properly. So people were very excited about it. By the way, every cell phone has a version of rake in it. It's still being used by all of you right now around the world. So Lotfi heard about this and he was very pleased. So he invited me to what was then called IRE convention. IRE was independent of AIEE. So I was I hadn't even submitted my master's thesis. I went to New York and met Lotfi, he was very gracious. And I gave my talk and so on. But that, he became essentially a mentor of mine and assisted me in my life on many occasions. He wrote reference letters. One of the first things he did is in 1960, Richard Delman, who was a good friend of his, was organizing a conference on optimization, communications, and so on in the RAND Corporation, Santa Monica. And Lotfi was co-organizer. So, as in the New York talk, I was the only student with 17 distinguished speakers, one of whom was Rudy Kalman, by the way, when I met first there. And I was there. And George Danzig, Barantin, Parson, Middleton, big names. But that was due to Lotfi. And many people were in the audience. Charlie Dissol was there, and etc. So, and then he used to write letters for me and so on. Then, so I graduated in 61. And at that time, MIT basically, if you wanted a faculty position, if you were a PhD, they would take you. It wasn't a good idea, we'll talk about it later. Because there were so many young assistant professors all competing for promotion, which made for a bad scene. However, I had that position, but I had always wanted to visit Caltech. And there was a visitor from Caltech at MIT, and he said, oh, come, you can work with me. It was JPL. So October 61, I went to JPL. My first boss was Andy Viterbi, whom several of you know. His boss was, etc. So that was a good crowd. But I was young, unmarried. I would travel 1 month to Berkeley and MIT. 1 month to MIT, the other month to Berkeley and Stanford. And in my visits to Stanford, because I had some friends in the same field there, in those days I didn't drive. I mainly drive, but I was very hesitant to drive. I'm still not a very good driver, my wife is. Both my late wife and she were better drivers than me. So I would hesitate about driving on the freeways. Lotfi would drive from Berkeley. He was a full professor there, attracted to Berkeley in '59, pick me up, take me to Berkeley for the seminar. Amazing. And But then, in the fall of '63, in January '63, I had occasion to spend 6 months in Berkeley. On sabbatical, that's also an interesting story. I didn't go back to MIT because Stanford made me a very attractive offer of an associate professor directly. I said, that's not bad. And I said I can only start in September '63 because I had promised to go to Berkeley, paid by JPL, to work with my advisor from MIT who was coming back. They said, a month or so later I get a call from the dean saying, we have some extra money and why have JPL pay for it? You join us and we'll pay for you in Berkeley. So there are more to these stories. Well, Lotfi, we were newly married and had a beautiful wife. Lotfi has an eye for he's a ladies' man. And so he was charmed by Sarah, and we were often at their home, Faye also. And I think one reason was, I noticed recently, her birthday was February 5, and his was February 4. But, she was going back to India when she became pregnant. And the night before she was leaving, Lotfi calls to wish her bon voyage. Again, his generosity of spirit and thoughtfulness and so on. So over the years, he has been helping me in many ways, writing reference letters for fellowships and so on. And in 1995, when you say, I got the education medal from the IEEE, that was the year Lotfi got the Medal of Honor. But I could not go to the award ceremony because at Stanford they had organized a big 5-day conference for me for my 60th birthday. So IEEE was very unhappy, but I said, I can't leave them here and come away there. So Lotfi read my remarks, and the photograph which I had, but I didn't bring, Lotfi holding my plaque was one thing he did. Anyway, so over the years we kept in touch in many ways. I just want to go through some, to show you the kind of person he was. Oh, another thing I should say, Mo mentioned it briefly. It's hard for you young folks, most of whom were not born in the 50s and 60s, to know how dominant a figure Lotfi was in the 50s in the systems field. Anything to be done, ask Lotfi. He wrote review papers, and in fact, while I was for my master's thesis, which he liked, he mentioned it in his review paper at the time when IEEE was formed by combining AIEE and IRE, and Lotfi was invited to write a special paper from the systems field. He mentioned this work and so on. But then to conclude, because as I said, one could go on, I want to read out some recent correspondence with Lotfi, which will show you. This is January 10, 2014. Dear Tom, you had neck surgery not long ago. How are you doing? I hope all is well and you are active as always. Please keep in touch. With my warm regards and best wishes for the new year, Lotfi. As some of you know, I'm slow on email responding. So the next letter, so I replied, and I told him that, I've recovered from the surgery and I'm happy to tell you that I'm remarried again happily to Dr. Anu. And so on February 15th, he replies to me, Dear Tom, many thanks for your informative response to my message. I read with interest what you wrote. Congratulations on getting remarried to Anuradha. Her credentials are very impressive. I'm very pleased to hear that your medical problems have been largely resolved. A new chapter in your life has been opened. Faye and I would love to see you in Berkeley. Keep in touch. With my warm regards to you and Anuradha. By the way, I should say, we would go to Berkeley occasionally, and Lotfi was always somewhere else. So I would invite Faye, and she would happily come to join us for dinner. Then, the last correspondence I had from in November 2015, Anu and I went to visit him in his home in Berkeley. It was a shock. Our last memory, even just a few years ago, was Lotfi, handsome, tall. He was bent over. You know, Afei was in a bed because she was being treated. But still, he was, you know, ladies man gracious. He took Anu's hand and kissed it. And my hearing is not very good, and I could not make out what Lotfi was saying. But so Anu was the interviewer, and they had a conversation. So then he writes to me the day or so after. It's amazing. Dear Tom, this is November 8, 2015. Dear Tom, it is a great pleasure to see you and your wife, Anu. I appreciate your visiting me and Faye. Please tell Anu that I was very impressed with her. It is remarkable, after passing away of Sarah, you rebuild your life so well. Intellectually, and she has some complimentary remarks. I won't embarrass you by reading them. Anyways, so there are a few lines about Anu. I did not know that you received the National Medal of Science. Please accept my congratulations. It is becoming very hard to think of a medal which you have not received. With my warm regards to you and Anu. That was the last correspondence we had at the last occasion. He was a great man, and you know, I owe a lot to him. And many, I'm, as you said, in the crowd of many people who were blessed by his presence. His body was flown back to, by his wish, to Baku, where he was made, treated great honors. And, we hope his soul rests in peace. Maybe we should have 30 seconds of silence remembering Lotfi. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to be here to present my talk. I'd like to thank Mo to invite me to this place. Today I'd like to think about Professor Lotfi Zadeh, who successfully supported me and advised me. In the field of the control theory, this embodied pattern is very important benchmark test. We should imagine this physical model to assign these values, and it is described with mathematical equations. This is the first stage to solve the problem. But how about this one? This is an embodied pattern, but platform is attached to the top, and here is the mouse. This is a target point, and the mouse is moving around on the platform. So this vehicle should take the balance, not falling down. How do you describe this system by mathematical equation? This is a living thing, animal. We cannot explain the movement of this one. But it can be done by the fuzzy logic. the way of the description of the complicated systems, especially nonlinear or sometimes time-dependent. This is the input signals, output signals. The most popular way is the mathematical equations. So that is one. The second one is the parameter distribution, such as the weight distribution or threshold distributions. The input is applied, then we can get the output. This is the second way. The third way is the description with if-then rules. Here is the rules. This is the input and output. If the ABCs are deterministic value or deterministic word, then that is a traditional AI, and this can handle the symbolic processing only. This is the scheme of the input space. So we need numerous if-then rules in this case. On the other hand, if these are represented by the fuzzy-linguistic terms, we call this one fuzzy if-then rules, as you know. Then by employing this description, we can reduce the number of the if-then rules drastically. And fuzzy systems handles this fuzzy if-then rules by symbolic processing with labels and meaning processing with membership functions. So fuzzy inference was supposed to be achieved by software in a digital computer when Professor Zadeh presented the fuzzy sets also. But it takes a time. In my case, I achieved the fuzzy inference within several tens of milliseconds, about 40 years before, in the mini computers. But it is not so enough to be utilized to the control systems. So I wanted to develop the intrinsic fuzzy hardware systems, special fuzzy hardware systems. This is the fuzzy chips, which are developed. This is a famous fuzzy integrated circuit. It is a boundary difference. This is one kind of the fuzzy logic function. This is the CMOS fuzzy integrated circuit developed in 1984. It includes all the fuzzy logic functions. This is the fuzzy memory device. And this is the fuzzy inference engine. This one board can achieve the one fuzzy inference. So if we employ 50 fuzzy inferences, in parallel, we need 50 boards. This is the this was developed in 1986. It exhibited the speed of 20 nanoseconds for one fuzzy inference, very fast. And my technology was transferred to the company, Omron. Then they produced the commercial fuzzy chip, that is a root chip and diversified chip. When Professor Zadeh presented the fuzzy concept, fuzzy sets, in 1965, then the Omron produced the commercial fuzzy chips. That was in 1988. So in those days, in Japan, many companies became to be so interested in the fuzzy systems because they expected to solve the many problems which by employing the fuzzy systems which were not solved by the AI systems, traditional AI systems. And when I made the talk in many places, the medical doctors wanted to establish some association. So I talked to Professor Zadeh to establish this association, that is the Biomedical Fuzzy Systems Association, BMFSA. In 1988, we succeeded to establish this association. This is Professor Zadeh, Professor Eddie Sanchez. Unfortunately, they have passed away, and Professor Terano and Professor Asai, they have also passed away. This is myself still alive.
Your younger brother.
And after that, I wanted to establish the National Research Foundation because only myself is small power. So I wanted to spread the fuzzy systems all over Japan. So in 1990, I established the foundation, national foundation, under the supervision of two ministries. One is Ministry of Education, Science and Culture, Monbusho. The other one is Ministry of International Trade and Industry, Susansho. So I am about 55 years old at this time. This is the Kailath in those days. This is the ceremony, opening ceremony of Fuzzy Logic Systems Institute. Of course, the Professor Zadeh came to this ceremony to give the talk. This is Professor Yeager, Professor Eddie Sanchez. And after that, I organized the so-called ISCA conference every 2 years, the 7 times from 1988 to 2000. In each conferences, the special theme was presented. In this ISCA 88, we discussed with NASA colleagues to hold the new theme of fusion of the fuzzy systems with neural networks. And next 2 years, ISCA 90, there are some presentations of the fuzzy neural networks or something. And at this time, we presented the new prospect of fuzzy systems with fusion of fuzzy systems with chaos. And ISCA 92, we presented the chaos chip. And so on. So all of these conferences were supported by Professor Zadeh. He advised me. So these conferences were so successful. So I'd like to thank Professor Zadeh this time. So thank you very much.
Professor Lotfi Zadeh, 1921-2017. You can see a picture of Professor Lotfi Zadeh and in his basement library. And can you read this? Introduction to Fuzzy Arithmetic by Kaufman and myself. It came in 1985 with the Japanese translation. Now, Professor Lotfi Zadeh, I think he made a lot of good contributions in control theory. One of the first one is on Z transform or G transform. In 1965, Fuzzy says, the Z number in 2013 when he published the paper at the age of 95. And I coined the word father of Fuzzy logic at the IFAC Congress in 1965. In San Francisco.
That was 3 years after me,
You coined it first?
1992.
Oh, that was 95, I guess. Yes. And Lotfi, a dynamic personality or mentor or guru who taught us the true meaning of cognitive uncertainty. A very family friend. Professor Lotfi Zadeh is a very dynamic person and some of the pictures I have taken from there was this calendar at his 90th birthday, and some of the pictures I have taken and more showed some of the pictures there. I am not go over this thing. And this is the family picture you can see. This family picture is till 6 months ago I saw in the living room at his home in Berkeley. My last meeting with him was on Friday, July 28th. I spent about 3 hours at his home in Berkeley. Now, his great contribution is supposed to be from fuzzy logic. What is fuzzy logic? Just I'd like to give a brief definition of that. I classify the uncertainty in 2 classes, but one is probabilistic or random or stochastic or statistic. Whatever you call it. This type of uncertainty is associated with the physical phenomena. This is random noise. Another type of uncertainty is fuzzy set, fuzzy logic, cognitive uncertainty, etc. And this is associated with human perception and cognition. And sometimes I call it cognitive uncertainty. And this arises because of our thinking process. This type of uncertainty, which study called fuzzy logic, fuzzy sets, is very subjective. This chair is not very heavy, I can move it around. But I ask a small kid, can you move this chair from here to there? He will say, yes, this chair is very heavy, I cannot move it around. Same chair for a small kid is very heavy, for a elder person it is not very heavy. Okay? So when we say heavy, not heavy, this is not absolute definition, this is just a very subjective. I count this through, there are about 50 people in this room. The temperature of this room is about 20 degrees. And this about 20 degrees, this is just a very fuzzy number. And Professor Zadeh wrote a paper about 4 years ago, and called it Z number, or Canadian definite Z number, okay? Which is very popular. Recently somebody published a book on Z numbers. I wrote a book with Professor Kaufman in 1985, which was translated in Japanese in 1992. And there I talked about the fuzzy aspect operations, additions of fuzzy numbers, subtractions of fuzzy numbers, multiplication of fuzzy numbers, division of fuzzy numbers. And this book came in third edition. My first meeting with Lotfi and Zadeh, almost 50 years ago, at the breakfast table, at the IFIC symposium on sensitivity and adaptivity in Dubrovnik, which was in former Yugoslavia. I was taking my breakfast. Professor Zadeh with his wife Faye came and said, "May I join you for breakfast?" I said, "Yes." When he introduced himself, I was so pleased to see him that I'm sitting such a great man, not because of physiology, but because of some of his work that he published in 1956 on frequency response, and his first book on x dot equal to ax plus bu on state space approach. Then he started talking about fuzzy logic, and I couldn't understand what he was talking about. Then I was wondering whether he is the same gentleman who has written the book or some different fellow. I asked him, "Did you write such and such book?" He said, "Yes." "Did you write such and such paper?" He said, "Yes." "Well, I enjoyed reading your paper and books, but what are you talking about? I can't understand." That morning was his plenary session lecture. There was supposed to be 1 hour, he took 2 hours. And room was completely full, people were standing there. And that's where I learned the word fuzzy. Okay? We are the fellow of man of random processes, but he taught me fuzzy on that day, and that was on August 23rd, 1968 in Dubrovnik. Then we became very good friend. Very good friend. He has been to my university several times, and several times. In 1983, when he was visiting my university, the name of my research lab used to be Cybernetic Research Lab. He asked me to change it to Intelligence Research Lab. And I did change it, and intelligence means the brain. And this is a symbol, this is logo of my research lab, which I designed with the help of Professor Lotfi. And Professor Lotfi taught me what fuzzy means. This fellow is driver, driving the car, he's using the steering control, speed control, or using fuzzy logic control. And one of the earliest picture, you can see myself, Professor Lotfi, my dean, Peter Nikipuro, my head department, Bob Pisan. And after the meeting, we had a lunch, and the faculty club, and you can see Professor Zadeh. I'm sitting here, Professor Dean Nikipuro sitting here. Now, our share of contribution to the field of fuzzy neural systems. I'll just briefly give you to establish the fuzzy journal, fuzzy sacred systems, atomic transition of fuzzy systems, journal of soft computing, and there are many more types of journals here. Fortunately, I have been associated with most of the fuzzy system journals over the last 30-40 years. Then through studies in the fuzzy system societies, first one was this IPSA, second NAFIP, and NAFIP is North American Fuzzy Information Processing Society, and the society in France, Japan, Korea, etc. And I was very fortunate to attend their meetings during their establishment. Through authored books, and the first book showed you that the fuzzy arithmetic with Kaufman, with Japanese translation. Another book was Fuzzy Management with Professor Kaufman, Japanese translation. A book was Neural Networks, Static and Dynamic Neural Networks, published by John Wiley along with the IEEE Press. And then we have over 30 edited books in journals in this field I've been associated with, and publishing research papers, over 100 research papers and book chapters in the area of fuzzy logic. And through training teaching graduate students, visiting professors, posting fellows in the field of fuzzy neural networks, over 70 people over the last 50 years from 15 different countries, about 15 different countries. For example, Canada, USA, China, Japan, Hong Kong, Belgium, France, Poland, India, etc. etc. Sorry. And some new challenges on the design of fuzzy logic controller. I call it neurocontroller. And I don't want to go into the details of this, but the word neuro to me is a process of learning and adaptation. And this is a dynamic motion, which is again using some of the ideas from Professor Lotfi Zadeh. Again, we don't have time to go through the details of this, but some of this work has been made published. And I will go over some of the things. I will skip some of the slides here. And by fuzzy logic controller, for example, given here in the yellow, is an error changes from a large value to a small value. The position feedback is varied from very large value to a small value. And simultaneously, the velocity feedback is varied from a very small value to large value. So you can see that this large, small, 2 units, okay, large, small, etc. are very fuzzy term, and we give the mathematical definition to this fuzzy. We'll skip the slides. Yes. So using this fuzzy logic neural network, fuzzy controller, we can see the response here given by red. Very fast response, no overshoot, and that is because of fuzzy neural controller. And fuzzy neural controller, we use these fuzzy rules. If the system error is large, then make the damping ratio very small and natural frequency very large. If the system error is small, then damping ratio large and frequency, natural frequency very small. So these type of rules we use, which are very fuzzy, and I'm not going to go into the details of this. On May 23rd, 2006, Lotfi was honored by the University of Saskatchewan by the award of honorary Doctor of Science degree. And I nominated him in 2004 without telling Lotfi. When I announced the 40th anniversary of the fuzzy logic in Berkeley for this award, Lotfi was very much surprised. And the reception at the University President House, someone made the following remark. President Zadeh, you are honoring our university by accepting this DSc degree. But as a matter of fact, you are honoring our university by accepting this degree. Why you are honoring our degree? Because Lotfi has many degrees of honors. So one additional degree from the university He's still many. You can see. So fuzzy and decent. And Lotfi and their way, you came in this world with your handful of uncertainties and left us with your hands open, leaving everything here for the benefit of community. Through both of you, though both of you have left us physically, your work on fuzzy tag uncertainty will inspire our future generation. So I thank
Thank you very much, Madan. That, but I know that you're trying to save time. So I'm actually going to save time because I only have 3 remarks. And as Henry VIII said to many wives, I shan't keep you long. So the first remark is really about when I first got to know about Lotfi. I actually got to know him more as a reviewer of his paper, his 1973 paper to the Assistance Men in Cybernetics Society Journal. Remember that? Some of you maybe. And the reason I was asked to review, Andy Sage was the long-time editor of SMC. And he kind of knew, I told him, he kind of knew my background a little bit, but my PhD was really on, good old queuing theory type of thing. But I said, I'm really interested in decision making. So as soon as Andy remembered that, he sent me the paper to review. And remember, this is the paper that Mo said was refused by several IEEE publications. Okay, and the SMC is the first one that was accepted, and that was the beginning. And Lotfi uses many times at different conferences. I keep hearing saying, "I really appreciate SMC for what they did." Mo, you remember that. So anyway, so that was the first paper. I was very impressed with it, and in fact, if I may say so, that really got me much more into the area not only of decision making, but of the uncertainties in decision making, which is really his focus is complex systems in decision processes. That was the somewhat title of his paper. So that to me was really my first introduction to him. And thanks to Mo, I then got to meet him at several of these conferences, because Mo, was he your co-conspirator in these conferences? Could be. Yeah, okay. I figured that one. Again, with uncertainty, but somewhat fuzzy. Okay? So that's first remark. Second remark is really, we all talked about Faye, and she really was a remarkable woman in many ways. And when we would go to these conferences, Faye would be there, and we get a chance to talk to her. I say this because we all know that Lotfi loved women, okay? And so we'd be talking with Faye, and Faye would notice that Lotfi's running around, basically introduce himself to all these women there. And then, I don't know whether you heard Faye say, "Don't worry, he's harmless." So anyway, I remember that very much. Then the third thing is that each time I'd meet Lotfi, of course it'd always be a year or two separating, I would say, "How's it going?" And remember what Lotfi would say?
So far, so good.
"So far, so good." And this reminds me of that joke where this guy thinks he's Superman, and he goes to the tallest building, and somebody says, "Oh, I don't think so." He says, yeah, I'll show you." So he goes to the tallest building, jumps off of it,
goes by the 10th floor and says, so far, so good.
Fuzzy logic actually transformed his life. You know, he's right. Whenever I used to call Lotfi every 2 weeks. Usually Sunday morning about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock his time. And I would say, how's Faye? So far so good. I said, Lotfi, you're married 65 years. You still haven't decided it is good enough? You say, so far so good? So I apologize, first of all, for running over time, number one. Number two, a lot of you are, I'm sure, anxious to talk a little bit. So I start with Mansoor, 2 minutes, not 3, 2 minutes.
Well, I know Lotfi in the following sense. I was a student at Tehran University during the Shah, and then I was head of the student group and so on, and we went on a strike that the Tehran University program is obsolete and this and that and so on. And the chancellor told me that if it is obsolete, how come one of our graduates is a chairman at Berkeley? And then 2-3 years later, I was in America and I was in a room like this. He gave a talk and I sit over there. We talk to each other through our eyes. I came back and I shook hands and I said, I'm graduated from Fani, and then Zadeh told me, I'm also graduated from Fani. And that was 1973. Since then, he and I exchanged a lot of letters, and not only that, I am the only human being among all of you, and in this world probably, who knows the social security number of Professor because I invited him to New York to give a talk, and I had to process that and give back his expenses, and Faye told me what the social security number was, and so I have that. I hope that someday when my library in Tehran open up, I have a collection of letters that I exchanged with Zadeh. That would be also part of that. So this is what I want to say. I come here because of him, and you told me that I will get a chance, and this is Iranian tradition. I should have said something, and thank you for
And don't misuse the social security number. Questions, comments?
anything.
Was going to speak.
What?
Delbert.
Yeah.
Delbert was going to speak.
Dale, you want to say a few words?
Well, I think I'm going to say this indirectly.
Come on.
Thank you very much. I want to say something about Mo being such a gracious individual, representing not only his own community, but lots of other communities in a very friendly and sociable way, and interacting with Lotfi. I really appreciate Mo. I just want to say that as loud as I can. Thank you, Mo.
Appreciate it. You are paying him very well. You are only about 50 minutes away, San Antonio and Austin. Okay, any other question, comments? Don't worry about the time limit, you know.
Well, can I
Tom.
Yeah. You spoke about, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You spoke about Lotfi and bringing CS into EE. You see, I mean, just to show his dominance, he was brought to Berkeley to be chair, really.
At the very beginning.
Yeah, that was well known among the community, and you know, when I was there in '62, it was known that he would be chair because the term was going to end on the previous person and so on. Anyway, one of his first actions, he was telling me about it. He says computers are going to be very important. That's why he hired Gene Wang from IBM. But there was already a computer science department in the University of California, Berkeley. So when Lotfi said, I want to make this not EE but EECS, they objected. They went to the chancellor and said, that's not possible. But Lotfi persisted and finally persuaded the chancellor that they can remain and we will be EECS. So he did that. A few years later, that department disappeared. And then MIT was the next big school to change its name to EECS. That was the second. After that, the floodgates opened, and almost every school except Stanford is EECS.
Thank you very much for wonderful. I didn't know about that history. No. All right, and if there is no question, again, my apologies. We hope to put this on YouTube and we'll send you the link.